In our headlines on this Wednesday, May 14th, here in South Korea. Presidential contenders from the two major political parties remain on the campaign trail, seeking to strengthen their base with supporters while working to firmly sway swing voters. And the Korea Development Institute slashes its growth forecast for the South Korean economy to 0.8% for this year, citing the Trump administration's tariff policy and its broader implications. An opera entirely in English, planned and produced by the state-run Seoul Arts Center, will premiere on May 25th. That is next Sunday, to offer the audience here a performance that beautifully blends Korean and Western elements. We are now counting down 20 days to the June 3rd snap election, and the Liberal Party contender began a very busy schedule in Busan today. For details on this, I have our political correspondent Shin Ha-young standing by live. Ha-young, it's good to have you on. So, Lee Jae-myung addressed voters in the southern port city of Busan.
You're right, Sunny. Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung began his Wednesday campaign in Busan. And to boost Busan's local economy, he pledged to move the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries as well as the country's largest shipping carrier to Busan. Take a listen.
I don't make impossible promises. I will move the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries to Busan. I'll also make sure HMM, the largest shipping company in Korea, moves here.
Lee's visit to Busan follows his campaign through southern regions, which are traditionally seen as conservative strongholds. And after Busan, he visited Changwon and is now holding a rally in Tongyeong.
I see. And Ha-young, what's on his agenda ahead?
Well, Sunny, after finishing his rally in Tongyeong, he will visit Gyeongsang, a major hub of the shipbuilding industry. And ahead of the visit, he announced his shipbuilding policy, pledging to strengthen South Korea's position as a maritime powerhouse through what he calls K-shipbuilding. And in a social media post, he said he aims to make Korea lead the global market for smart and eco-friendly ships, while also developing special ships and ship maintenance as the new growth engines. And he also promised support for developing green fuel-powered ships and digitalizing the entire shipbuilding process. And tomorrow, he will continue his campaign in Jeollanam-do province, visiting Gwangyang, Yeosu, and Suncheon. That's all for this hour. Sunny.
All right, Ha-young, thank you for that coverage from the Liberal camp. Up next, we turn to the Conservative camp, whose contender remains in the southeastern part of the country as well. For more on this, I have my colleague Kim Do-yeon joining me live. Do-yeon, welcome. So Kim Eun-soo has spoken about support for science, I hear.
That's right, Sunny. Kim has been campaigning throughout Gyeongsang-do province during the day. Now that also means he's been in the Gyeongsang-do province region for third straight day, and cities that he's been visiting all have their own specialized industries focusing on science and technology. So one key message that came during his campaign today, when he was in Sacheon to visit the Korea Aerospace Administration, he pledged that if elected, he will create a new post of Deputy Prime Minister for Science and Technology. Take a listen.
Why do we need a Deputy Prime Minister for Science? It's because it shows the nation's will, which means budget and power, and this is the only way to yield results. Anything said other than this doesn't matter.
During a visit to Doosan and Ability in Changwon, Kim praised the company's resilience through Korea's nuclear phase-out and pledged full support if elected president, especially in advancing SMR technology and leaving politics out of industries. Of course, Doosan is the company involved in the project of the Czech Republic's Dukovany power plant. Kim also says without science and technology, there is no future, adding that while it may not bring in votes, any leader who cares about Korea's long-term growth must invest heavily in the field. He also revealed his pledge on science and research earlier today, which included measures to support research and development in general. But one aspect that stood out was his pledge to send a man to the moon in 2032 and have a Mars rover project by 2045.
Right, some ambitious pledges for the next frontier. Before you go, Toyon, do tell us a bit more about his campaign trail.
Right, Sunny. Surprise, I also have a map ready for you, so let's take a look. Now, Kim also started in Seoul on the first day, stopping by Daejeon and ending up in Daegu. He's gone farther south since then, and as we spoke about, he hit small cities today, the darker purple lines. Now, as we have been talking about, these are typically known as a conservative stronghold. To give you a reference, throughout the Gyeongsang-do region, there are 65 congressional districts, and during last year's general election, only 6 parliamentary seats were won by the liberal side. That said, a lot has happened since the general election, and Kim could be trying to solidify his supporter base first, then heading to other regions.
All right, Toyon, thank you for that coverage from the Conservative camp. Right, also on the campaign trail, Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok is in the southern port city of Busan today. There he pledged to push ahead with the construction of a new international airport on Gadok-do Island, as well as a new baseball stadium. He also made his way to Busan National University for lunch, continuing his campus cafeteria outreach to college students that began at Gyeongbuk National University in Daegu on Tuesday. In other news, analysts at the Korea Development Institute have slashed their growth forecast for the Korean economy to 0.8% this year. Moon Ji-young covers this latest cut and its reasons.
The Korea Development Institute gave a grim economic outlook for South Korea on Wednesday, citing trade uncertainty stemming from tariff and weak domestic demand. Data from the KDI showed it expects the Korean economy to grow just 0.8% this year. That figure is exactly half its 1.6% forecast made only 3 months ago in February. The KDI added that of the 0.8% downward adjustment, external shocks contributed about 0.5 percentage points, and internal shocks contributed 0.3 percentage points.
The biggest factor for this adjustment is the U.S. tariff increase. The U.S. tariff hikes became full-fledged from April. And on top of that, the uncertainty regarding tariff policy has also significantly increased. These factors are having a negative impact on our exports. And we believe this is also partially spilling over negatively into domestic demand.
While the forecast was based on the assumptions that the 90-day suspension of reciprocal tariff would continue, the growth outlook could be adjusted further downward if upcoming negotiations fall through or the suspension ends. The think tank said that despite robust shipments, overall exports are slowing and conditions may further weaken if the U.S. raises tariffs. Internally, domestic demand is recovering only slowly due to contracted consumer sentiment, driven by political turmoil as well as the mounting external uncertainties. Private consumption is slowing, especially in the services industry, including accommodation and restaurants. The think tank forecasts that consumer prices will rise by 1.7% this year due to the economic slowdown and falling international oil prices. Other key factors include the sluggish construction industry and weak corporate investment sentiment. The KDI highlighted the need to ease monetary policy to respond to a potential economic slowdown caused by growing uncertainties at home and abroad. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
On the trade front, Korea's ICT exports as well as exports by its small and mid-sized companies are staying strong. Findings show overseas shipments of information and communication technology products jumped close to 11% on year last month to amount to almost $19 billion. Notably, semiconductor shipments surged over 17% to some $12 billion, that is, marking an all-time high for the month of April. Similarly, shipments by small businesses during the first quarter of this year totaled $27 billion, up 0.7% on year. By product, exports of cosmetics raked in $1.8 billion and exports of used cars $1.7 billion. The local labor market saw employment expand in April, but the expansion remains uneven between age groups as well as by industry. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin reports.
South Korea's job market continued to grow in April, with job additions posting growth for a fourth consecutive month, but employment of young people and certain sectors continued to face challenges. Data from Statistics Korea on Wednesday showed that the number of employed people aged 15 or older stood at 28.9 million last month, up 194,000 from a year earlier. This marks a gain in the 100,000 range starting from January, after employment figures showed a decline in December. The growth in April was led by job additions in healthcare and social welfare, as well as scientific and technical services. But employment in manufacturing, a key pillar of South Korea's job market, continued to face headwinds. The sector saw job additions drop by more than 120,000, the biggest drop since February 2019, also extending a negative growth for 10 straight months.
Manufacturing employment is weakening further amid sluggish domestic demand and growing external uncertainties.
And construction employment also remains sluggish, falling by 150,000, marking a 12th consecutive month of declines since May last year. By age, employment growth was seen only in those aged 60 and above and 30 and above. And all other age groups saw declines, with those in their 20s posting the sharpest drop.
To address the sharp decline in the employment of young people, stronger fiscal support through a supplementary budget is needed, along with labor reforms to spur corporate investment.
He added that he believes that the risk of job losses remains due to sluggish domestic demand and declining exports. The government, in a ministerial economic meeting headed by the country's acting finance minister on Wednesday, acknowledged ongoing job declines in key industries amid tariff-related uncertainties and pledged to swiftly execute a supplementary budget. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has sealed a deal to acquire Germany's Flecht Group for some $1.7 billion. Founded in 1918, Flecht Group is a leading heating and cooling solutions provider. The acquisition comes amid growing calls for energy-efficient approaches to addressing indoor air temperature and quality in light of the global push for greener solutions. This is Samsung's biggest acquisition since its $8 billion purchase of Harman International in the year 2017. U.S. President Donald Trump says sanctions on Syria will be lifted, adding that the removal comes at the request of Saudi Arabia. Our Park Gonu has details.
The more than a decade-long U.S. sanctions on Syria to pressure the country's former dictatorship are set to be lifted. That was announced by U.S. President Donald Trump in a speech made at an investment forum held in Riyadh during his 4-day visit to the Gulf, Trump's first international trip since his return to the Oval Office.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
Trump said he made the move at the request of Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, while saying U.S. measures against Syria had now fulfilled their purpose. Syria had been urging the U.S. to lift sanctions since last December, following the ousting of its former dictator. Syria's Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani called Trump's decision a pivotal turning point, as Syria enters a phase of reconstruction after years of war. Trump is expected to meet with Syria's interim leader Ahmed al-Shara on Wednesday, while U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will hold talks with Syria's foreign minister in Turkey later this week. On Tuesday, Trump called Iran the most destructive force in the Middle East, vowing it would never be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Trump also said he remains open to diplomacy with Tehran, saying he is not just condemning Iran's previous choices.
I want to make a deal with Iran, but if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch and continues to attack their neighbors, then we will have no choice but to inflict massive maximum pressure, drive Iranian oil exports to zero like I did before.
Also on Tuesday at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum, Saudi Arabia announced an investment of $600 billion in the United States. The agreement includes an arms deal worth nearly $142 billion, which the White House called the largest defense cooperation deal Washington has ever done, as well as other technology partnerships. Park Gonu, Arirang News.
A former senior Pentagon official believes the Trump administration's national defense strategy may seek greater, quote, strategic flexibility of U.S. forces Korea to keep China in check. Randall Schriver, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Indo-Pacific region, claimed the plan may explore a broader partnership between Seoul and Washington to address competition with Beijing rather than simply respond to provocations by Pyongyang. Remarks to this end were shared during a press session hosted by the Institute for Indo-Pacific Security in Washington on Tuesday. On the cultural front, an opera entirely in English, planned and produced by the Seoul Arts Center, will premiere on May 25th, that is next Sunday, to offer the audience here a performance that beautifully blends Korean and Western elements. Our Iuni has more.
This May, SAC will debut its first ever original opera, The Rising World, Spirit of Water. Blending traditional Korean themes with a modern twist, the English language production marks a major milestone created entirely in-house from story to music. The opera tells the story of a princess captivated by a water spirit and a female artisan who builds a water clock to save a kingdom plagued by constant water disasters. The cast features internationally acclaimed opera singers, including South Korean soprano Hwang Soo-mi as the princess and mezzo-soprano Kim Jung-mi as the artisan.
I would say that the work portrays a human being, regardless of gender, who engages with nature, particularly through the element we call water. It explores the relationship between humanity and nature.
The element of water is expressed in many ways throughout the music. The opera's composer, Australian Mary Finster, explains that while you might hear it through electroacoustic sounds or a special instrument called a waterphone, the feeling of water mostly comes through the orchestra's instrumentation and the flowing ornamentation in the vocal lines. The show will have its world premiere at the Seoul Arts Center's Opera House on May 25th, followed by performances on May 29th and 31st. The creative team boasts international talent, including conductor Stephen Osgood, praised for his work at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, leading the Korean National Symphony Orchestra.
It's our window into the imagination of the composer and the librettist. I get pages, hundreds of pages of music. But what it is on the page is dots of ink.
Those pages, filled with countless notes, are a world the conductor steps into. He waters it and breathes life into it so the music can finally reach our ears. Now it's the audience's turn to step into that imagined world and fully experience an opera like a powerful fairy tale, one that flows with a message we can all feel. Iunhee, Arirang News.
And a Korean diplomatic mission has docked at a Japanese seaport for the first time in over 260 years. The reenactment comes amid celebrations to mark 60 years of diplomatic relations this year. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin files this report from the neighboring country.
It's a landmark voyage brought back to life more than 2 centuries later. The reconstructed Joseon Tongsinsa ship, once used to carry Korean envoys to Japan from the 17th to 19th centuries, has now reached its final destination, Osaka. While the recreated vessel also sailed to Japan in recent years, this is the first time it has anchored in Osaka since the 11th Tongsinsa mission from 1763 to 64. This year's arrival is all the more symbolic as it coincides with the 60th anniversary of normalized diplomatic ties between South Korea and Japan.
Korea and Japan can't move away from each other. We're very close geographically and historically. This ship isn't just a symbolic restoration. Just as it opened a sailing route, I hope it also opens a path for both nations to grow together in the future.
The Tongsinsa mission has been a symbol of mutual respect and cultural exchange beyond borders. Recreating that history today will play an important role in helping Korea and Japan learn from their friendly past and build a future-focused relationship.
This journey wouldn't have been possible without this team, who designed, built, and sailed the vessel modeled after the original Tongsinsa blueprints.
We began planning this reconstruction back in 2015, and now, nearly a decade later, we've reached Osaka. We are deeply grateful to everyone who helped make it happen. Our institute will continue restoring and sailing traditional Korean vessels to preserve this legacy on the water.
But the celebration didn't end at the port. So as Tuesday, May 13th, marked the National Day of Korea, here at the Expo 2025 Osaka Kansai, the reenacted Joseon Tongsinsa prepares something really special here. The envoy procession marched through the expo grounds just as the original envoys did when they set foot in Japan. Drawing large crowds, the parade echoed across the venue, spotlighting the centuries-old message of peace-building and cultural diplomacy. As for the Tongsinsa ship, now docked in Osaka, it will offer an onboard exhibition on the Goodwill mission before its journey back home. 송진, Arirang News, Osaka.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping met his Brazilian counterpart on Tuesday, pledging to defend free trade and multilateralism amid global trade tensions. During President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's 4-day state visit to China, the two nations signed 20 bilateral agreements to enhance cooperation in agriculture, technology, finance, and other sectors. President Xi emphasized the importance of opposing unilateralism and protectionism, stating that such actions, which he described as acts of bullying, lead to isolation. President Lula highlighted the necessity of China-Brazil relations and said both countries are determined to unite their voices against unilateralism and protectionism. Also on Tuesday, President Lula attended a 3-yearly ministerial forum between China and the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, where President Xi pledged to enhance China's trade and investment in the region. In India's Kashmir region, the Indian Army has eliminated 3 militants. The encounter comes a few days after the recent ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan on Saturday. On Tuesday local time, Indian Army units launched Operation Keller in the Shopian district as part of efforts to combat terrorism in the region. The operation targeted 3 Pakistani militants whom the army called hardcore terrorists. It follows the events of April 22nd in Kashmir's Pahalgam, where 26 tourists, mostly Indian, were killed. That attack has been attributed to Pakistani militants. Meanwhile, in a move signaling a return to normal, schools and colleges in non-border districts of Kashmir reopened on Tuesday. Uruguay's former president José Pepe Mujica died on Tuesday, aged 89, following a battle with cancer. Known globally for his humble lifestyle and progressive policies, Mujica served as Uruguay's president from 2010 to 2015. A former guerrilla with the Tupamaros movement, Mujica spent nearly 15 years in prison during Uruguay's military dictatorship in the 1970s and 80s. After release, when democracy was restored in the country, he returned to politics, eventually leading the country and implementing significant reforms, such as the legalization of abortion, same-sex marriage, and the recreational use of marijuana. Finally, in London, the Court of Appeal nullified the 1987 murder conviction of Peter Sullivan on Tuesday. Sullivan, aged 68, spent 38 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Sullivan was convicted for the rape and murder of a 21-year-old victim. However, recent DNA testing revealed that biological evidence from the crime scene did not match him. The Criminal Cases Review Commission, an institute investigating potential miscarriages of justice, reopened the case in 2021. After the court overturned the conviction, Sullivan wept but expressed no bitterness, saying the truth shall set you free. The case is considered the longest-known miscarriage of justice in British history. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
It was another day where shirt sleeves felt just right for many this afternoon under sunny skies. For tomorrow, we'll see a change as rain is expected across the country, which should bring a break from the recent summer-like heat. About the rain, the capital area in Gangwon-do province could see 5 to 20 millimeters. The rest of the country could see 5 to 10 millimeters from the dawn through the afternoon. Checking on tomorrow's temperatures now, most parts begin the day in the mid-teens at 16 degrees Celsius in the capital, Daejeon and Daegu. Afternoon highs will be 2 to 7 degrees lower tomorrow, getting up to just 19 degrees in the capital, Daegu at 23 degrees. Then we are looking at another chance of rain for the southern regions in Jeju Island on Friday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Thank you for watching. Our panel session is up next.